A very good evening to you. Welcome to another edition of Newsmaker Live right here on DBS Television. My name is Timothy Paulian. We'll be together until 10 o'clock this evening with the clip that peaked. During the course of this evening's broadcast, we'll have reason to make reference to Valinda Joseph. Remember this 12-year-old from Saltibus. In 2002, December of that year, she was brutally murdered. That matter is still before the courts. The individual who was charged with her murder is on bail. And I made reference to Valinda Joseph because we'll be focusing on an upcoming forensic symposium that is scheduled to take place in St. Lucia between Friday and Saturday of this week. And the theme is protecting the children of the Caribbean from maltreatment and abuse. We'll be focusing on a range of aspects. For example, recognizing non-accidental pediatric injuries in the emergency room, and also bite mark assessment in pediatric sexual assault cases. But we commence our broadcast this evening with a focus on the crime situation and the use of forensic science services to tackle those problems, particularly the gun crimes that we have been experiencing over the last few weeks in St. Lucia. My guests, Ms. Fernanda Henry, Director of Forensic Science Services, and we also have on the broadcast Corporal 776 Bastien, Chief Warden at the Boys Training Center and Scenes of Crime Officer. Welcome to the program.
Good evening. Thank you for having us.
What role does forensic science play, ma'am, in the fight against crime, and in St. Lucia in particular?
In St. Lucia in particular, forensic science plays a pivotal role in the fight against crime because science is objective, science is robust, science is made up of specific procedures with an end goal. With respect to forensic science in St. Lucia, we have had the establishment of a forensic science service for over 30 years. It started with Mr. Louis Murray and Mr. Cowie. Mr. Cowie was Canadian, and he did drug analysis, and Mr. Murray is a trace analyst by training.
You're operating from VH?
Yes, they were operating from VH, if you recall. Then we moved to the new facility that is in Tapion at, it's now called the St. Lucia Forensic Science Laboratory. At BH, it was called the Forensic Science Unit. When we moved there, the services that we offered were the same as at Victoria Hospital, drug chemistry. Then we expanded actually into DNA analysis. We also did trace examinations. So over the years, forensics has played a role in the investigation of crime and in the pursuit of criminal elements in St. Lucia.
But based on what we're seeing on television, for example, your forensic files and different programs
Yes.
and so on, one gets the impression that we are lagging behind many countries, the United States and so on. Why is that?
I can't say that we are. I think our service is smaller, it's of a smaller scale. We have the same equipment that they do. And I think what happens with these shows is that it presents I wouldn't say false, but incorrect perception. It's not, we have a show that takes up an hour, and in that hour we are shown the scenario, the problem, and at the end of the hour the problem is solved. And that is not the case in reality. In reality, we call this the CSI effect in forensics. In reality, it takes years. We have cold cases. It takes us years to solve a case simply because we are not able to find the evidence, that one piece of evidence that can link a perpetrator or a suspect to a crime. In some instances, it takes us a week to figure it out, or a month.
But let's talk about the norm.
The norm in St. Lucia.
Over 300
Right.
cases, murder cases are pending.
Yes.
Over several decades now.
Yes.
And I'm sure that the ordinary man in the street who is watching this broadcast right now, he does not have any hope that those murders will be solved ever at all. Is he wrong?
It is a two-pronged problem with not just the investigation, but with the prosecution. So I think on the one end, the investigation might be taking a long time, but then on the other side, it may also be taking a long time for there to be that court case that gives us the outcome.
There's a lack of symbiosis, any kind of relationship taking place between the respective sides, and maybe you, Corporal 776 Bastic, can come into that. You as a scenes of crime officer and also chief warden at the Boys Training Center.
Yeah, I think it's a lot more and better can be done. I think we need to approach this more in a team effort in order for us to solve this. I think one of our issues is that we tend to stick to our own departments and not coming together to try to solve the problem. Joint training, a lot more collaboration, because we all are faced with the same problem. And then when we tend to want to stick in our own sections and not, and try to solve things in that way, we have seen that it does not reap the rewards that we would like to reap.
So therefore, how do we successfully tackle this issue? Because the problem is manifesting itself in terms of the crime problem in St. Lucia, and it did not start yesterday.
No.
It has been around for a very long time.
Yes.
But there is need for us to tackle it.
It is.
How do we do it? Using the forensic science.
And investment in the technology, investment in the human resources, and I think we are on par to do so. Like I said, we have the equipment. We need the human resources, especially from my perspective at the laboratory, and we are getting the support from the Department of Justice. So we will be filling positions soon, because we have restarted the operations in 2017. I'm sure you're aware that the laboratory was closed for some time. Our staff, yes, in 2015, our staff complement reduced to less than half after that. So we restarted with 4 of us. We're now at 13. So and it's been 2 years.
130?
13. Yes. So we are in a rebuilding phase. So once we are able to acquire the human resources that is necessary for us to be fully functional, I think we will have a stronger presence with crime. But like Corporal Bassett was saying, it's a team effort. The forensics cannot operate in isolation. We must work with our collaborative stakeholders, and that would be the police with the investigative element, and on the other hand, the prosecution, to bring the case to that end goal.
But do we have an appreciation as a society for the use of forensic services in the fight against crime?
I don't think so. To be completely honest with you, I think that the science is not as prominent as it should be, and I would like to change that perception. I think in general, we don't appreciate what science can do for us. We don't invest in research. We're not people who, to have that level of critical thinking to invent things also. So I think science is not as prominent as it should be in our society. It doesn't get that recognition to say that it is, it's so pivotal and can play such a huge role. I would like to change that as well, because I think it starts in school, that the teaching of science, to get kids, excited about it, so that they can pursue a science career. So forensics, I think, needs to be more prominent in the courtroom. We do not go to court often enough. We have been to court, but we don't go often enough. So I'd like to see the role of forensic science be a lot more prominent in the courts with respect to the prosecution of cases. And when I say prosecution, it doesn't mean that we have to find somebody guilty who the police say is guilty. It also means that we can exonerate someone if they are not the perpetrator.
Why do you think that we generally have the tendency to determine the outcome of the case, even without evidence and without making reference to the science, the forensic science that is available, DNA evidence and things of that nature?
Yes, we do have that. There are cases where you do not need the science to find who is responsible. It does happen. But I think with the, like the director mentioned earlier, with the increase in all of these CSI shows that you alluded to earlier, I think the public generally is expecting to see some aspect of that when the police investigate matters. And
Okay, take for example, people are saying that I don't know, it's a belittling of persons like yourselves, scenes of crime officers, and so on. That police officers come in, they brush for fingerprints, and people tell you that they know that nothing will come out of that. You have a database. How effective is that particular process?
well, I can tell you from my experience and knowledge, there is a database. There are several crimes that have been solved using fingerprint technology here in St. Lucia.
May I also add that fingerprints are more
conclusive.
unique. Yes, more conclusive. They are more unique than DNA. Two people can have the same DNA. Twins can have the same
Identical
DNA,
twins.
but you will differentiate twins by their fingerprints.
But how do you build people's confidence and trust in professionals like yourself, in you as the director of the Forensic Science Services and police officers, so that when you appear on the scene, people will say to themselves that there will be a favorable outcome as far as that matter is concerned? Because you cannot always rely on eyewitnesses coming forward.
The way we build the trust is, I think we need to prove ourselves. The proof is in the pudding. We can talk and talk until we get blue in the face, and if there is nothing to show, then it was not worth it. I think we need to prove ourselves. We need to prosecute cases, and I think the media plays a role too. I don't think that there is very much court reporting happening anymore. When I was younger, I remember reading in the newspaper about the the outcomes of cases. That is important, because then the public will understand and know that there was a role, that forensic science played a role in any particular case, or it was fingerprinting that played the role. So that helps. We need to focus a little bit more on the outcomes of cases, and we need to prove ourselves. We need to shorten the time that it takes for us to go from an investigation to a court case, prosecution, and we need to prove ourselves.
As a scenes of crime officer, how concerned are you that, for example, before a police officer lands on the scene of a particular crime, that you have people there, throngs of people who are congregating? We like to do that, congregate, and we contaminate that particular area, and we are totally oblivious to the fact that we are doing that in the process.
Yeah, well, we are always concerned about that. I mean, that's something that I think will remain. I mean, as human beings, we're just so inquisitive, wanting to see, wanting to know. And in this age of social media, we all know everybody wants to be the first to see something, take a video, take a photo. So we're always concerned. But some of the ways that we can help mitigate that is through education, sensitization. I think more effective and efficient police response after the incident has been
preserving the crime scene.
Yes, preserving the crime scene. So getting there as quickly as possible will assist in that regard.
But it appears that the police will leave that area unattended for hours, if not days. Shouldn't, in some instances, for example, critical cases, shouldn't the police officers be there overnight keeping watch?
Yes, and there have been several instances where we have done that. We have had instances where we have maintained and preserved a scene for weeks, and we take certain measures to cause that to happen. So it may entail sometimes having police officers on a shift system 24 hours a day providing security for that scene. So it has happened.
Mm-hmm. Let's look at the major problem that we are facing with gun crimes, Ms. Henry.
Yes.
In terms of the use of the lab, is it being utilized? Is it services being accessed to address this issue, dealing with ballistics and so on?
We do not have a ballistics unit at the Forensic Science Laboratory, and that is something that we are planning to change.
Now, at the time the Forensic Laboratory was opened in December of 2009,
Yes.
10 years, almost 10 years now.
Yeah.
crime was definitely an issue.
It was.
The use of firearms would have been an issue as well,
Yes,
armed
but it
robberies
wasn't
and
as
so on.
prominent. Yes, that is true. It wasn't as prominent. We have had a significant increase in gun crime, and the forensic laboratory cannot encompass, it cannot provide all of the services that that one would expect, and because because of demand. So in 2009, our gun crime didn't particularly require us to have a ballistics unit. In 2019, it does. So we now need to cater to the needs of our client, our society, the police, to be able to.
If memory serves me right,
Yes.
I think those gun crimes have been very prevalent for a very long time in St. Lucia, even back then, 10 years ago. And I don't think 10 years ago would be too far when you're looking at the crime situation in St. Lucia. So what are the services being offered by the lab? What are the areas
The
being
services
addressed?
currently offered by the lab are drug chemistry, and we do evidence examinations.
Okay, tell me about what evidence examination.
We examine evidence for body fluids so that we can assess the evidentiary value of the evidence, and we outsource the DNA services. We are restructuring our DNA section so that we can reopen the DNA laboratory.
And tell me about drug chemistry.
Drug chemistry is the identification of controlled substances.
It appears then. Now, I'm speaking for my viewers,
Yes.
right? So my viewer is chuckling now,
Okay.
saying you are more interested in marijuana. It's about to be decriminalized,
Right.
right? Are you talking about you're more interested in cocaine and things of that nature?
Yes.
It appears.
But not just that. Again, that industry is also changing because we have synthetic marijuana. We also have other types of drugs, methamphetamine, there's fentanyl, ecstasy. And if you realize the opioid crisis that's going on in North America and Europe, it's not too far away. So we need to be prepared.
That our lab is anachronistic.
I see.
It's obsolete.
Really?
It is not serving a purpose that is in sync with what the reality of what we're experiencing right now, and even I suspect what we were experiencing in 2009.
I see. Interesting. Well, like I just articulated, we intend to expand into firearms and digital forensics. Okay,
so ballistics. In terms of the samples, where do we send them to? Do we send it because at the time we opened the forensic laboratory in December of 2009, we were hoping to contract our services to the other islands in the sub-region.
Yes, that was the intention.
St. Kitts and Nevis has opened its own lab.
St. Kitts and Nevis does not have a forensic laboratory. That is a crime scene unit. That's what it is.
It opened it in 2018.
18, yes.
Right. But I understood that we sent some samples to St. Kitts. To St. Kitts.
I cannot speak to that.
To St. Kitts, relating to a particular case.
I cannot speak to that because the laboratory is not involved with that.
You're not aware of this?
No.
So it's like, no, you're saying that you cannot speak to it, or you don't know?
No, I cannot speak to it. The laboratory was not involved with it.
Because what we heard was the samples were sent over to St. Kitts.
Okay.
Involving that particular well-publicized matter.
Okay.
But let's talk about the relevance of the lab. How relevant is this lab?
Right. Well, that is exactly,
how relevant is it now?
That is exactly the point that I'm trying to make. So we have to make the lab more relevant because the needs of our society and our client have changed. We need to change the services of the laboratory or amend the services of the laboratory to be able to cater to those needs. So we need to now move into firearm examinations. We need to reopen our DNA laboratory because it's been closed, and we also need to start looking into digital forensics because these are the needs of our current. The
whole matter dealing with firearms examination and so on. How long will it take for us to be in a position to do that?
It will take about a year and a half to be in a position to do that. That does not mean that we would not be able to start it immediately. The year and a half is for training of new people. The training of those new people involves having a mentor, someone who is already trained in the field. So that person would be able to do casework while they are training the trainees.
What do we do now when we have a case involving the use of a firearm?
It is outsourced.
Take for example, the incident involving the 17-year-old who was allegedly shot by the police in Castries just a few months ago.
Okay.
That particular matter, it has to go to the UK, because I think initially we were sending those cases to Barbados.
Yes.
Barbados, we are told now, is overwhelmed. We
Okay.
once sent those cases to the Bahamas.
Let me say that the laboratory has not been involved with firearm cases. It had not been involved not until this year, 2019. So when you say we had sent and you're looking for a response from me, I can't give you any feedback because the laboratory was not involved with those cases.
I'm just talking about the relevance. I'm talking about, for example, the resources that we are putting into
Yes.
the lab right now, its efficiency,
Yes.
and in particular, its relevance to the people of St. Lucia.
Yes.
So do we have much to boast about
With the forensic
with
science laboratory?
the lab right now?
Well, you see, that's the thing. That is where the media comes in. So you would not know what we have to boast about because we can't go about boasting about it.
So I'm giving you the opportunity to blow a trumpet. What
Well,
do we have to boast about
I
in terms
can't
of the
speak to-
resources, what we're investing in the lab,
Yes.
and what we are achieving?
In this financial
With the
year,
drug chemistry, the work that it's doing, and the evidence examination.
in this financial year, over $1 million was invested in the laboratory by the government of St. Lucia. We have the equipment. We have a piece of equipment that is being validated for us to improve the efficiency of drug chemistry, the turnaround time, and that will allow us to be able to expand the services in drug chemistry as well as generate revenue services to the wider region, which was originally our intention with the laboratory. We have DNA analysis that despite our DNA laboratory being closed, we still have the analysts involved in the examination of the evidence and in the interpretation of the evidence. We have been able to identify serial rapists based on collections of profiles that we have. So work that we have done, we have used that work to identify perpetrators in cases where there was no suspect identified. That happened in St. Lucia by the forensic lab. So again, these I can speak about it, but I can't talk about the cases because they haven't been to court. I can just let you know the successes that we have realized. I agree with you 100%. And in this for the upcoming year, I've requested that we expand to firearm examination, and I'm sure that the commitment by the government will be forthcoming for us to be able to do so.
How much have we lost in terms of being progressive as far as solving many of those cases, whether it's crime-related and other things that would warrant the use of forensic science, because of the fact that it had to be closed
Yes.
a few years ago and had to be reopened, and that is after the discovery of improprieties in evidence handling and the security of the facility. We all know that it was reopened in early 2017 after its closure in May of 2015.
That's correct.
Is that something that's so sensitive that you need to have the necessary resources and the human resources to invest in it so that you can have an institution that is functioning at a very high level and consistent level?
Yes, it is. It's important. The closures of the lab and the closure in May of 2015 was not the first one. The closures have been a severe setback. So when you talk about progression, when we think that we're making 10 steps forward, then we take 5 steps back every time we close the laboratory. So we have to ensure that the operations remain consistent. So we had to undertake major infrastructural repairs so that we could stop these closures, with mold and water, etc. But when you talk about I'm trying to recall your question.
It has to do that.
The functioning at a high level. A forensic laboratory, it cannot function any other way than to function at a high level. There has to be a standard at which you operate. And for us, the standard that we aspire to is ISO 17025 accreditation, and that is for testing laboratories. What aspiring to a standard does is it provides you with that consistency, because the standard then tells you how it is that you should be operating a laboratory similarly to other international laboratories. So once we are able to achieve that standard, it will demonstrate our consistency, the reliability of our results, the competency and credibility of the people who work there as well. So a forensic science laboratory needs to have, it does not necessarily need to have accreditation, but it must have its procedures and protocols aligned with the standard, because accreditation is a whole different ballgame. Accreditation requires money. Once you have money to pay for a body of people to come and examine your work, your documents, basically is what it is. It's like document review, to say that you are doing what you say you're doing, and it's also documented, then you get that standard. But once you can demonstrate that your protocols and your procedures are to international standards, you're running a good lab.
So for the evidence, admissibility of such matters, the outcomes, if you're not properly accredited, does that impact the outcome of your case in terms of whether that case is admissible in court?
Well, that's what I was trying to explain. Accreditation, we should not view accreditation as to determine whether our evidence can be admissible in court or not. Accreditation is a seal, it's a stamp. What you must ensure is that your protocols and your procedures.
Can a good defense attorney not poke holes?
He can, but that can be easily rebutted, if that is a word, with demonstrating your protocols and your procedures. And that is what the assessors for accreditation will come and do. They come in to look at your documents. Let me see what you did. And if it is in line, if it is what the term we use is compliant, if it's compliant with the standard, then it means that you're running a good lab, and they'll give you that seal of approval. But in the absence of accreditation, you can still run a good forensic lab.
Sorry for ignoring you over the last few minutes, Corporal 776 Bastien. I'll be turning my attention into you in just a moment. But let's take a commercial break. You are watching Newsmaker Live right here on DBS television. During the course of the program, we'll also be focusing on the 4th Annual Caribbean Medical, Legal and Forensic Symposium that will be taking place in St. Lucia on November 15th and the 16th under the theme Protecting the Children of the Caribbean from Maltreatment and Abuse. Back in just a bit. Thank you so much for staying with us. You're watching Newsmaker Live right here on DBS Television. My name is Timothy Polion. We go up until 10 o'clock this evening. My guests, once again, Fernando Henry, Director of Forensic Science Services, and Corporal 776 Bastien, Chief Warden at the Boys Training Center and Scenes of Crime Officer. Somebody sent me a WhatsApp, by the way, and they said that they're watching the broadcast and they do not believe what we have is a forensic science lab.
Okay.
They say it's a forensic lab.
Oh.
So this will be a joke. Anyway, what is happening as far as scenes of crime? Any progress being made in this particular area?
Yeah, there is some progress being made. I must admit to, as to the specifics, I cannot divulge right now, but there is some significant progress being made so that we can increase our efficiency and our service delivery, because that is very critical. Whatever is submitted to the forensic laboratory is dependent upon what we do at the scene. So the efficiency and proper collection.
So it's normally the process. So you go to the scene of a crime. What do you start to do? What are you looking out for?
Well, you first assess the scene. And part of what you do is to effectively document the scene. Documentation is key in the whole aspect of forensic investigations. If it was not documented, it did not happen. And that is very important. And documentation takes place in a number of ways. Note taking, sketching, photography, measurements, videography too. And you need to do that in a manner so that you could tell the court or show the court what happened. We're all aware of our current justice systems where a number of our cases take so many years before they go. And you need to bring the scene back to the court as if it were like yesterday. And it takes a lot to do that. It's very painstaking, meticulous work. And you have to be patient. You've been able to work under stress for very long periods of time. And that is part and parcel of what we do. But the Scenes of Crimes officer has to be knowledgeable basically about almost every aspect of forensic science, because you will come across so many aspects of forensic science that you must be able to know how to handle, how to deal with, how to document it, how to package it, because all these things will have an effect on the analysis.
So you analyze the evidence and so on, the material. Are there instances where, for example, you'd ask the crime scene officer to return to the scene, or would you have to go there yourself?
Well, I functioned as a crime scene consultant for some time before becoming the director. So I have been to crime scenes and I have assisted or consulted with crime scene officers as to the preservation and collection of certain types of evidence, depending on what the circumstances are. And then there's the other aspect of it is the analysis, like you say. When you assess a case based on the evidence that you're presented with, and you sit and have a case management meeting, or you read certain facts about the case. When you are presented with the evidence, then you now have to like Corporal Bastia said, you need to bring that picture to the courtroom as well. But there is a method to it. It must be very methodical. You must be very observant, and there must be a level of critical thinking, because you must think outside of the box. What am I not seeing is what you should ask yourself, because sometimes the obvious is not really what it is you should be looking for. Sometimes the absence of things really tell the true story. So it involves a lot of that. So we must consult with the crime scene officer as to what it is that you saw at the scene. Maybe look at scene photographs as well, and then bring that to bear on the analysis of the evidence that is before you.
How do you become a scenes of crime officer, generally speaking? Is it because years on the force or training or experience?
It's a specialized unit, and a lot of it is training. then you can be, well, you have, training takes different forms. So a lot of it is on-the-job training. We do training along with the forensic lab as well. There's overseas training. So
the bulk of the training overseas would come from where? Which country? The United States, because
The
we
United
know that we
States.
have to be concerned about the U.S. particularly because
Yes.
it withdrew its services, financial and otherwise, to the Royal St. Lucia Police Force because
Yes.
of the impacts.
yes, we've had quite a bit of our training from the U.S., but also we've received training from the French. We've received training from the U.K. as well. So, but the bulk would be coming from the U.S.
Okay, let's focus on this upcoming forum that is scheduled for Friday and Saturday of this week. Once again, it is the 4th Annual Caribbean Medical Legal and Forensic Symposium, Protecting the Child of the Caribbean from Maltreatment and Abuse. And readily, we have to focus on one particular individual. I don't know, we can't go into detail in particular, but Felinda Joseph, murdered December the 2nd of 2002, reportedly left her home in Saltibus en route to a nearby seamstress. Her half-naked body and brutalized body was found later, discovered by her father, 12 years old. How does this case turn out for you?
Well, I can tell you that this case precipitated one of my forensic scientists. It catapulted her into forensic science. So it was her inspiration to want to be changed in her country. I remember it as as standing out as what happened. That was the question for me. What happened to this little girl? What happened to her and why? So in 2002, the laboratory was at the Victoria Hospital, and of course, in 2002 I was studying to become a forensic scientist actually. So at this point, we're waiting for the case to go to court, or for there to be a court day for this case, and our interest is peaked. There has been forensic work done with the case. As a matter of fact, the forensics was done, in the region. And when you spoke about the accreditation and so on, I just wanted to point out that in the region, there aren't very many accredited laboratories. We have forensic labs in Trinidad, Barbados. There's one in the Cayman Islands, and so the Cayman is the only one that is accredited, and Jamaica has a forensic lab as well. Jamaica recently attained accreditation, and Cayman was re-accredited, so they have been accredited for over 4 years. So some of the forensic work went to these regional laboratories, and I'm sure some of the outcomes will be presented in court.
Now, bite mark assessment, I imagine, would have been one of the areas covered as far as this Felinda Joseph case is concerned. Do you think if we had such services in St. Lucia, would have solved it already?
We have used bite mark quote-unquote services in St. Lucia. If Corporal Bastia would like to elaborate a little, we do a certain element of bite mark analysis here.
Yes, we have had cases where we've had to use that analysis. It more or less take a two-pronged approach. One in photographing the bite mark impression, and the second part would be to sometimes to bring a forensic odontologist to analyze the bite mark, or sometimes to take impressions from the suspects. So they would have to take castings of the teeth and things of that nature
To be able to make a comparison.
But how concerned are you that this case is still pending? I mean, some 17 years, almost 17 years later. The individual was arrested and charged, some 2 years after the incident actually occurred. Granted bail between 2011 and 2012, but eventually got it, some $60,000 in 2013.
Okay.
And 6 years later, it is still pending. What does that say about the judicial system in St. Lucia? What does that say about the use of forensics? What does that say about our policing?
I think it reiterates what I said about the prominence of forensics in the courts. and that we need to improve on the feature of forensic science in court. But more importantly, that we need to improve the turnaround time, the amount of time it takes for our court cases to be disposed of. So it indicates that we need to critically look at our judicial system and find solutions to this issue.
Yet another cold case that might never be solved, ma'am? You think?
I don't think so, no. I believe that there will be a resolution.
Let's focus on the 4th Annual Caribbean Medical, Legal and Forensic Symposium, November 15th and 16th at the Harbour Club. What is this all about?
The symposium speaks for itself. It is a forensic and medical legal symposium. So it is an environment where professionals, forensic professionals, medical professionals, legal professionals come together to discuss this very pertinent topic, protecting the children of the Caribbean from maltreatment and abuse, children like Belinda Joseph, whom it is our responsibility to protect. So we will be looking at the theme through various lenses. So from the forensics perspective, the analysis, for us to be able to identify maltreatment and abuse from the forensic perspective. We'll be looking at it medically. How do doctors in the emergency room, how do doctors in private practice, how can they identify maltreatment and abuse in children? We'll be looking at it from the psychological perspective, what it is that maybe the teacher or the social worker can identify in the child, in their mannerisms, in the fact that they don't make eye contact or they don't smile, how we are able to identify and treat maltreatment and abuse. And then sadly, we also have forensic pathologists who are able to identify maltreatment and abuse in the victim.
How prevalent are such cases in St. Lucia, sir? Maltreatment and the abuse of children?
Oh, I think it's quite prevalent. I think about, according to the stats, approximately 60 to 70% of reports of abuse, generally speaking, involve children.
In St. Lucia?
Yes.
So that is a very serious matter.
Mm-hmm.
It is indeed. And I think that is one of the reasons why this symposium is on.
Mm-hmm.
But how is it being tackled at the level, in terms of the police investigations and so on? Are you already giving it the due attention that those cases really deserve?
Yes,
Considering that you have to deal with,
Special unit
deal with a range of other matters, such as your gun crimes and so on.
Yeah, well, the good thing is that the police has a dedicated unit, the vulnerable persons team, dealing with matters of that nature.
How many people in that unit?
There's, I don't know the correct combination, but there's a unit in the north and one in the south dealing with these matters. And as teams of crimes officers, we have to respond to every single report that is referred to us of that nature.
Looking at things culturally in terms of the maltreatment and the abuse of children and so on, parents may tell you that they're disciplining their children.
Yes.
How do you reconcile this with the fact that there are laws to protect the rights of children and so on?
Well, we definitely need to sensitize the public as to the rights of children. In November 2018, our Parliament unanimously passed the Child Justice Act and the Child Care Protection and Adoption Act that clearly articulates how it is that we are supposed to treat our children. And I think, subconsciously we know when we cross the line. We know there's a difference between a quick, reflexive tap, a flick of the wrist, as opposed to taking a saucepan or a broom to hit a child, or a belt and beating them for minutes or we subconsciously know when we cross the line. And when your conscience hits you and you feel that you cross the line, you cross the line. And we have to make a conscious effort as adults to not hurt our children. That, like, we were discussing earlier, children hold no grudges. They are so forgiving. They're so loving. They're beautiful people. And if we don't nurture our children, then we are nurturing monsters. We are rearing criminals.
When you investigating such cases, and for example, you have to interview the children, I mean, is that something that's difficult? How difficult is that?
I wouldn't say it's difficult. It's just that the interviewer needs to possess certain qualities, certain skills. Children think, respond, behave differently to adults, and you need to be sufficiently trained to know that, to bring out the information from the child. It's once you have the necessary training and experience, it's not something that is extremely difficult to do.
What is the one case that stands out for you over the last few years which have occurred in St. Lucia involving the maltreatment and abuse of a child?
The one that stands out is Milan Ferdinand. A few years ago, a child, he died as a result of circumstances surrounding that, which is before the court right now, and would not want to say too much about it.
Are we as citizenry, a community, a society, look out for those abuses, look out for that kind of maltreatment that this particular forum is about to address this weekend? Do we ever care about this?
Generally, I don't think that we care enough. I think as a society, we focus too much in our own little space. And something could be happening right next door. Abuse could be happening right next door, and we don't do anything about it. It's unless maybe a teacher at the school recognizes something, or the child goes to the emergency room and the doctors or the nurses recognize, and they are duty bound to report these matters. But I think as a society we could be, and we can be, we can do more in that regard.
Let's look at some of the areas that will be touched on, Ms. Henry. Let's look at, for example, recognizing non-accidental pediatric injuries in the emergency room. Yes. How do you use forensic sciences to do that?
Well, that would be a medical doctor. So the doctor will talk about how to recognize non-accidental injuries, because we can say the child fell, the child hits his head against the wall, so it really, that presentation is going to be done by Dr. Joseph Labadie, I believe, who is a consultant in the emergency room. So she will explain to the audience how to recognize those non-accidental injuries that come in with the report of it being an accident.
What are some of the prevalent cases involving children in St. Lucia, involving the maltreatment and the abuse of children, as far as you're aware?
For us, at the laboratory, most of the cases we get are sexual assault cases or crimes, of a sexual nature. So we see a lot of sexual assaults in children under 5, children between 5 and 12, children between 12 and 18. So those are the cases that would come before us, and then there is the homicide. It's not just sexual assault, but anyone who may have died as a result.
But no doubt recommendations will be coming out of this particular forum.
I must tell you that we held a sexual assault symposium in March of this year, where we brought stakeholders together, advocates, non-governmental organizations as well, where we discussed sexual assault, at a level where we could be open and honest about it, to say, well, this is our situation, because we first must recognize and accept, the situation as it is, so that we can improve it. And the end goal of that, in culmination, with this symposium, is for us to be able to present a document to Cabinet where we can effect some policy change. We need to have a private space where sexual assault survivors are examined. They need to stop going to the emergency room, where everybody can recognize us, that there is a police officer accompanying this person with an examination kit, and then you sit there for 12 hours waiting to be seen, because the doctors are inundated inundated with other things. I don't blame the doctors. They too are working with limited resources. So we need to do better for our survivors, and that is our goal.
At the time, the sex crimes are so prevalent in St. Lucia. So how do you go about this particular process, along with all the other cases that you have to deal with? Because you just mentioned the need to have a safe space,
yes,
to deal with those issues,
yes,
almost
and crime scene is involved, because crime
Yeah.
scene now needs to come to take photographs, and all of this needs to be presented as part of the case. So they too, their workload increases with this.
We too, like I mentioned earlier, for all reports of that nature that are referred to this department, we have to visit the scenes and perform an examination of the scene. So an examination is performed of the victim by medical personnel. And we perform an examination of the scene. Both parties, the intention is to gather as much evidence as possible in an effort to identify the perpetrator or perpetrators.
We continue to hear about serial rapists and so on.
Yeah.
Do we really have those?
We really
in St. Lucia?
have those, Timothy, and it's very alarming to me. It's very concerning. We really have them. And the thing is these are people whom we know. I mean, St. Lucia is a small society, so we
Why you say that
them.
these are people we know?
Well, because they're ordinary citizens. They live here.
Oh, okay. In that context.
Yes,
yeah.
in that context.
But we don't
they
know
have a right.
that they are serial rapists.
Right, and
Yeah.
we do not know that they are serial rapists. But we do have them. We have been able to identify at least 3 of them from our work at the lab.
Who is a serial rapist? Does it mean that you have to consistently rape people on a particular
I
occasion?
think once you've raped more than one person, that makes you a serial rapist. Yes.
And the use of the work of the lab in terms of detection and so on, how
Yes.
effective is the lab in this?
Well, like I said, we were able to detect serial rapists when there was no suspect. The way DNA works, DNA is a comparative science. You will not be able to know whose DNA profile it is unless you have a reference profile, something from a known person to be able to compare it to. So when crime scene collects evidence from the scene and we process it for DNA, this is what we call this unknown. These are unknown samples. So we get a profile, but we don't know whose it is. It's after they have been able to identify a potential perpetrator or perpetrators that we run those known samples, and then we can compare
And that person will have to be arrested by the police, right?
That's correct. Right. So then we compare the unknown profile with the known profile, and if there is a match, then we understand that with DNA there's a lot of statistics, right? So we understand on the degree of the statistics how close of a match it is to determine, well, this is the person. Because sometimes you get 1 in every trillion, 1 in 6 trillion people. The world only has 3 trillion people, so
the world has
3 billion. I'm sorry, we're not even in the trillions.
Over
7 billion. Okay, so
Yeah.
we're not even in the trillions. So if we don't have a trillion population in the world, then it kind of is you, isn't it? Doesn't the preponderance of evidence indicates that it would be you? So that's how DNA works. So with DNA being a comparative science, you must have a known profile to work with. So what we have is a collection of profiles, and we were able to use that. When you see, and the thing about DNA too is that you can have a unique profile that kind of stands out to a DNA analyst. So with our DNA analyst, she saw something that was unique about and it it kind of clicks, and where have I seen that before? And that's how we were able to identify serial rapists.
What are some of the other areas that will be addressed at the forum?
Other areas that will be addressed at the forum are establishing a forensic pathology service in St. Lucia, and what it entails, how we can do so to international standards, what is necessary, and how the protection of children plays a role in forensic pathology. We will be talking about the laboratory. Some of us will be discussing how DNA evidence has been introduced into to St. Lucia, because our DNA used to be done by the UK, Barbados, Jamaica has done some of our DNA before. Then we will be looking at how to use DNA analysis in grouping cases. So some of the perpetrators now believe that they if they don't penetrate, then there will be there won't be any evidence to be found, to incriminate them. So we'll be looking at how we can use forensics in groping cases.
Is the lab involved in that particular alleged rape which took place at the Bodley Correctional Facility involving a 16-year-old female?
I have not been briefed on that.
Okay. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll be hearing from you. You are watching Newsmaker Live right here on DBS Television with my guests, Ms. Fernanda Henry, Director of Forensic Science Services, and Corporal 776 Bastien, Chief Warden at the Boys Training Center and Scenes of Crime Officer. When we come back, once again, your calls. Welcome back. Thank you so much for staying with us. Remember, we are also on Facebook. So I'd like to say hello to you watching the broadcast via this medium and to you watching on television as well. Thank you so much for joining us on DBS Television. Telephone number is on screen, 451-9788, so that you're going to call with your questions and comments for my guests. They are Fernanda Henry, Director of Forensic Science Services, and Corporal 776 Bastien, Chief Warden at the BTC and the Scenes of Crime Officer. Good evening, you're on the air.
Tim, good night to you.
Hi, good night to you, sir.
And to your guests.
Good night.
Good night, sir.
Let me ask the forensic lady there, Tim. Where you guys from Bodley, the forensic lady? I want to ask a few questions, Tim. One night there. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I'm listening.
Do you have a holding bay at the forensic lab?
A holding bay?
Yes.
Can you explain what a holding bay is?
Oh, okay, madam. We are in a number of hit and runs in the country where cars and bikes hit people, and there are blood on them.
Yes.
So is there a place to hold these vehicles at the forensic lab?
No, we do not have, if that's what you call a holding bay, we do not have a vehicle examination bay at the forensic lab, but the police have a facility that we use for that purpose.
No, baby, well, you're wrong there. Because I'm telling you, that's supposed to be on your compound.
Okay.
Because you didn't leave blood and whatnot and evidence, right?
Yes.
So how can it be somewhere else? It's supposed to be in forensic lab to do testing. That's number one.
Yes, sir. Please understand that the laboratory was not built with the vehicle examination bay. But I can let you know that we intend to change that.
Oh, okay. But by then, we're in 20-something, yeah?
Yes, yes. I agree with you.
That's one for you there. Number two. Do you all do ballistic testing in this country?
No, I think we addressed that earlier on in the show. We don't do any ballistic analysis here.
But DB, that is a forensic lab. That is done by you all.
And I think I explained that, sir, that in 2009, there was I guess we did not anticipate that we should have a firearm examination unit. So it was not included in the services offered at the lab.
And money spent there? Okay, let's go. Let me handle you there now. What Tim escaped something there for you. Do you have, what, okay. When there is blood splatter on the criminal place, what do you all use to check if there is blood splatter in a crime scene?
There is
in a house.
There is a chemical for that. There are two of them that we can use. There's one called luminol, which I'm sure you're very familiar with.
Oh, yes, my dear.
I'm sure. I think I've heard you say so before. And there's another one. There's this other one. There's minimal interference to DNA, so it's a better one that we use. Okay. Well, okay. I'll let you pass you that. But next time, make sure you're having a forensic lab. Have a holding bay. Yes.
Because that is key to evidence. Because if a vehicle hits somebody,
that's right.
You cannot put it in the open.
It's not in the open. Okay, I agree with you, sir. Thank you for that point. It's well taken. And as I said, the proof is in the pudding. So you will see the changes that we intend to make to the laboratory, and I hope that we can appease you as a citizen, because your taxpayer dollars are going towards the lab.
And remember, your lab by the sea. Eh?
Yes, we do remember that.
The sea breeze does plenty damage.
Oh, we know that. We see it already.
Have a nice night.
Thank you.
You ever worked in customer relations?
No.
Let's continue to take your calls. Once again, you are watching Newsmaker Live right here on DBS Television with my guests. Once again, Fernando Henry, Director of Forensic Science Services, and Corporal 776 Bastien, Chief Warden at the Boys Training Center and the Scenes of Crime Officer. Suicides in childhood. I remember a few years ago we had a few cases. How do you determine whether that individual committed suicide, a child?
Yes, suicide is a tricky one, and suicide should always be the last resort, because there's this stigma, and there is associated with suicide, because the surviving relatives tend to blame themselves when a suicide occurs. With children, what we're finding is that children have more suicidal ideation, and I think social media plays a very prominent role in that, because it affects our sense of self. We tend to like ourselves based on the number of likes that we get. So we're finding that a lot of children are cutting themselves and taking their lives. There's the issue of bullying as well. So what's his name? Dr. Gary Collins will be addressing suicides in children, and hopefully we can learn, from his talk, so that we can assist young people who may have any suicidal ideation.
But are there instances where, for example, the people have drawn their conclusion and claimed that and believe that
it's not suicidal? Oh yes, certainly, and that is where forensics comes in. That's where the crime scene officer comes in, because the examination of the scene, the collection of evidence will help to determine whether it was actually suicidal or homicide staged as suicide. And we have had that, haven't we, Corporal Bastien?
Yes.
We've had
that. We've had several crime scenes staged to make it seem like it's something different. And the crime scene officer is one of the main persons who would assist in making that determination.
And the other significant person is the forensic pathologist.
Pathologist.
Yes.
So
at
that
the
is where,
postmortem.
that's why we spoke earlier of the team approach. We need to work more cohesively as a team. Sometimes it may be for the forensic and pathologists to be at the scene, you know, to better understand the dynamics of the scene, because it's not finding a cause of death does not just happen at the
Postmortem
dissection of the body.
Yes.
It happens from scenes at the scene to try to better understand what you're going to see during the postmortem examination. So it is not just the dissection of the body and then you cut open and then you see, okay, well, I know that's what happened to you. That's not how it works.
But how does public opinion affect your work, if at all? Because you have made a particular discovery, and then out there in unison, people are jumping to a particular conclusion, and people sometimes they are very suspicious of the processes that we have in place to prove whether somebody is guilty or not guilty or linked to a particular crime, and people have already made up their minds with regard to a particular outcome.
Yeah. Well, I can speak for us at the forensic lab. Public opinion does not bear on our analysis. The scientific approach is very objective, and once you start to veer away from that, then you find yourself in problems and you lose your integrity. So there's this phenomenon in forensics called a cognitive bias, where you can also become influenced by public opinion. So sometimes it's good to not have too many details about things, just to know what you need to know to be able to do your work. So we are aware of that. We must be aware of that as forensic scientists. But I can tell you that that the public opinion really does not have much bearing in what we do, because we follow protocol, we follow our procedures, again, to international standards, and the outcome will speak for itself. Forensics is objective, and sometimes it exonerates people when the public thinks that the person is the perpetrator, but the science speaks for itself, and we must allow it to speak for itself.
Once again, we take your calls, and the number is on the screen. My guests, Miss Fernanda Henry, Director of Forensic Science Services, and Corporal 776 Bastien, Chief Warden at the Boys Training Center and Scenes of Crime Officer. We take your calls right now. We have just about 15 minutes left on the program. What is the situation right now at the Boys Training Center with your role as a Chief Warden at the BTC? What is happening there right now? Because people continue to say that a lot of our young men, some of them in particular, would have passed through the walls of the BTC. And whether they have received the level of assistance and lectures, and whether the rehabilitation work has really worked to ensure that they do not graduate from the BTC to the BCF.
Yeah, well, it's an ongoing process, and it's a rehabilitative center where we strive every day to change things. Of course, there have been many success stories from there, but then again, just like the forensics, it's not out there. But it's a tedious process. Molding children in today's society is a lot more challenging than before when you and I grew up. We have so many influences, a lot of them negatively, but we've had much success, and I think currently we have a very good team.
What is it like working at the BTC in the first place?
It can be very challenging, but as with any or most fields of work, you need to have that natural liking, that passion for wanting to see change, and you feel that sense of satisfaction when you could see how one came in, and a few months down the line you could see that positive change in them.
But so far, people do not get the impression that the work that's being done there at the Boys Training Center is helping reform the wards there? Because I think up to yesterday I heard the minister, Mr. Leonard Spidermotu, talking about probably building a new facility and improving the standard and the situation there.
Of course, things can always be better in every society, in every institution. There is always room for improvement, and if that is going to happen, that's very much welcome. But like I said, there's a lot of the good that's been done there, but it's not out there in the public domain as much as the negative.
How concerned are you that there's other things happening in the society that will be impacting on the work on the lab?
It goes back to your very first question about how relevant the laboratory is and are we progressive? That's my concern. Are we always ready to meet the needs of our society? Because we should always be ready to meet the needs of our society. Not that we should offer every service under the sun, but we should have a solution to most, if not all, of the issues, that are impacting our society. So that's what concerns me, that we will be able to assist, that we will play a role, a meaningful role in assisting St. Lucia, the police, the prosecution, just our citizens, just to serve our citizens. I think that is our purpose, and we should always be relevant. So that's my concern.
Earlier on, you made reference to getting the necessary resources to upgrade the forensic laboratory. How confident are you that the authorities, government, will be fulfilling that particular commitment, that promise that they have made?
Yeah, well, like I said, if the last financial year is any indication of the commitment of the government to assisting the lab and improving the laboratory, upgrading the laboratory, then I'm very confident that we will have the resources that we need to improve.
How trained are the staff there?
Oh, the staff are very trained. Oh my. Today, I can tell you that we completed bloodstain pattern. We were talking about, I think you mentioned it, we completed bloodstain pattern analysis training today. We involve, like we always try to involve our stakeholders. So we involve the police and the prosecution as well. So we are very trained. Training has to be ongoing, and it's a huge thrust for me with the staff, that they be sufficiently trained to be able to be credible, to produce their evidence in court, and be deemed experts. So training is ongoing. It's an ongoing thing. Our scientists have undergraduate degrees at a minimum, and everyone functioning at the laboratory has the requisite educational background and the training to function in their respective roles.
What about the presentation of your the outcome of your work in court?
Well, I have been to court, and it was a sexual assault case actually, and at the time we weren't even doing DNA analysis yet, there was a conviction in that particular case. One of the things that occurs with us is that when the perpetrator, or I suppose the accused at that point, because they've been charged, is presented with the evidence that comes from the laboratory, then they opt to plead guilty. So we don't go through the long trial process, and we don't really get a lot of feedback from the court or the police or the prosecution with respect to to those cases. So we don't know the numbers, but that's what happens with a lot of our cases as well. So that explains why we don't go to court very often, but I expect to see us feature more in court.
So do you have a preference when you appear before the court, whether you're giving evidence on behalf of the prosecution or the defense?
Not at all.
What kind of mindset do you go into court with?
I go to court with a mindset that I have done work, and the work speaks for itself. So I go to present the work to the court to tell them this was the evidence that I had, this was what I did with it, and this is the result, and I let the court decide. So I'm just there as a vessel, to bring the forensic evidence to court. So I don't have a preference whether it is for the prosecution or the defense. I want the defense community to know that the forensic lab works for them, because we are fair, unbiased, and objective.
How do you feel when you have, for example, people are making reference to the work of the police as a crime, scenes of crime officer, And sometimes they take issue with how you preserve the area, how you collect the evidence. And sometimes you feel that you cannot even defend yourself against those criticisms and allegations that are leveled at police officers in general.
Well, of course, there will never be enough training. Training is something that will always be needed, especially in the field of forensics. It evolves ever so often, and you always need to be kept abreast. But I must say that we've had quite a bit of sensitization. I'm also a trainer. I've conducted several training sessions and sensitization with officers throughout the entire organization, not just only the police, Borderley Correctional Facility, the fire service, on how they should respond to scenes, preserve the scene and evidence as first responders. And the public will always have their part to play, and we take a lot of it as constructive criticism, because we always, as professionals, we always know that we can do better. And when these criticisms come along, as a professional, you just do not just put it on the back burner. Look at it and see how can you improve.
But with regard to the crime scenes and so on, when you go there, are you looking for something in particular, or are you looking for anything at all that would help your case?
You're looking for everything. You're looking for everything, and like director mentioned, you need to think outside of the box. And sometimes I say you must not even give yourself a box. Just think broad. Do not think what you think did happen, or it did happen that way, or that way alone. Because what that creates is tunnel vision, and it will prevent you from seeing other evidence that may be right there. So you have, like I said earlier, you have to be very patient. You must be, it's very meticulous work. And you have to be able to work in an environment like that. Is very stressful and work for long periods of time. So you have to look for everything, and allow the evidence to speak to you. Because when things happen, evidence will be left or taken. And you must allow yourself to interpret that, to tell you what happened and how it happened. And that is the genesis of what a scenes of crimes officer would do at the scene. And like the director mentioned earlier, sometimes expecting to find something there is not there, is evidence in itself. So, for instance, glass. People, when glass breaks, people just see it's just pieces of glass, but all these pieces can be interpreted to tell you something.
Are there instances where, for example, you go to a crime scene and you realize, for example, that there's a tampering with the evidence, maybe by the perpetrator of that particular crime? How do you determine that? No.
How do we determine that? The scene really speaks for itself, and you have to have the trained eye for you to be able to observe it. Let's say the scene was tampered. I'm just trying to think of a tangible example. Let's say someone went to the scene and drank, or a very popular one is someone opened the fridge and took a bite out of something in there, and then left it on the counter. Now you come and it's a house. You expect that people use their house, right? But why would or it was left on the washing machine, let's say. No, when you think about it, well, someone wouldn't ordinarily leave an item of food on the washing machine, So you really let the evidence speak for itself, and you have DNA in that bite mark, in that object of food, if it's an apple or a piece of cheese.
Once again, you are watching Newsmaker Live, and my two guests, we just have about 5 minutes left on the program. Miss Fernanda Henry, Director of Forensic Science Services, and Corporal 776 Bastia, Chief Warden at the BTC, that's the Boys Trading Center, and the Scenes of Crime Officer. In our remaining moments, let's just quickly go through again the symposium that's coming up on Friday and Saturday. What are you expecting to come out of the exercise?
Well, I expect a very lively discourse on the treatment and prevention of maltreatment and abuse in children, because we will have practitioners or participants from across the region, as far south as Trinidad to as far north as Turks and Caicos. We have people from the USA, Canada, and the UK coming as well. So I expect to, for us to be able to learn from these people and their experiences. I expect that our professionals will learn a lot, and it will impact, the work that we do, for us to be able to serve our community better.
Why the focus on the maltreatment and the abuse of children?
Because children are the foundation of our society. We must invest in our children if we want to have a strong, resilient nation. So they are the now. They are our present.
What will happen on the first day, the Friday?
The Friday, we have the opening ceremony, which will last about 15 minutes, and then we go straight into presentations, and that will take us through the entire day. Saturday, we start again with presentations and questions, discussion, etc., and then we culminate with a reception for our participants.
Let's begin the final comments. Let's start with you, sir. Final comments from you.
Okay, well, on the symposium, I'm looking forward for us to have some great discourse, to network, and share experiences and ways that we could improve on better helping our children. Of course, they are our present, they are our future, and what happens now affects what happens later. So I think this symposium, it was a very opportune activity, and we look forward to having a great time there and to really share some great ideas, opportunities.
Final comments from you, ma'am?
I would like to, well, at this point, registration is closed, so I can't even invite people to come, but I would like for the public to understand what's happening in St. Lucia, that this is an inaugural event for us for forensics in St. Lucia. It's really a spotlight on our forensics. We plan to use it to grow our forensic service in St. Lucia, to be able to cater to our society. It's really important for us to be relevant to our society, and this symposium will really give us the opportunity to network, to be able to use the experts, and I guess the word use is not exactly the right term, but you use the resources that you have to get where you want to be. So a lot of the experts who will be presenting will be assisting us with training, etc., so that we can grow our service.
Well, Ms. Henry and Corporal Bastian, thank you so much for being my guests on this evening's Newsmaker Live.
Thank you for having us.
And to you, thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for contributing via your call. And it's now time for the clip that peaked.
Yeah.
Once again, thank you so much for watching. If it's Wednesday, it's Newsmaker Live. Please join me tomorrow afternoon between 12:30 and 2 o'clock on Real FM 91.3 North and 91.5 South for Newspin. Good night and see you next time.